Well, it's great to be back with you who are in the original 12-stone cohort for the master's program. And I'm really glad to be back with you and partnering with Dr. Chip Arnn in this course. I want to talk to you for a few minutes in this session about leadership and conflict. The truth of the matter is that conflict is always part of a local church experience if you're a leader. And if you've led for any more than 5 minutes or 5 days, you know that to be true. There's a quote that I've loved for a long time. I read it a long time ago in one of Josh McDowell's books. And Josh said, it's better to resolve a conflict than to dissolve a relationship. I believe that. And like you, I'm committed to reconciliation. I think in the local church, we're called to be agents of reconciliation. Spiritually, obviously, the bigger overtone is spiritually reconciled to God, Romans chapter 5, but also relationally reconciled with each other. Romans 12 is a key passage there, and Matthew 5:24. So we're really dealing with two big ideas, the huge salvation kind of thing with being reconciled to God, and yet the under theme there that's very connected and very important is being reconciled with each other. One of my favorite passages in the New Testament in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 talks about those two notions together but connects them in the ministry that God gave us. So let me read in 2 Corinthians 5. I'll start in verse 17. We'll go to verse 19. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone and the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. That's a great passage. It reminds us of that connective tissue between the larger story of salvation, being reconciled to God, and how we are also agents of that, but also helping people be reconciled with each other. And of course, Jesus tops it off in Matthew 18, verse 22, talking about forgiving 70 times 7. The message is clear. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Not that that's easy, but here's where it gets really complicated. We're also called and responsible to drive the vision. We're called and responsible to steward the vision, to drive the vision. That's a crazy difficult tension to manage. When you have this notion of reconciliation, and then yet there's an assertion, you're driving the vision, you're moving forward, and you got to jot this down. Reconciliation does not equal everybody always gets along. When you're in a church and you're moving forward and you're accomplishing things for the mission, reconciliation doesn't always mean everybody gets along. As we drive toward the vision, you got to get this, as we drive toward the vision, we create tension, often conflict. That's the issue at hand. As we drive toward the vision, we create tension, often conflict. And you think, well, that sounds like a kind of an unusual idea. The people do all no, they really don't create all the conflict. And yes, sometimes on that interpersonal stuff, we step in as the shepherd and we help mediate and we help relationships become restored and reconciled. But oftentimes it's the leader who brings conflict into the mix because you're driving things forward. And that's what we want to talk about. For example, the classic example is the need to release or to fire a staff member or maybe a key volunteer in the church. And that feels like, or that can feel like, the polar opposite of anything redemptive or relationally reconciled. But leaders who won't make changes because they really just dislike conflict, they'll cause the organization, they'll cause the church to stall. When they won't make the tough call, when they won't push the organization forward with vision, or if they do push, they won't deal with the conflict that it causes, the organization will stall. So you can see how complex it gets. And you can see why many churches, to be really candid, why many churches stay very, very small. because let's just all get along. Let's just be nice to each other. So all the relationships great. But if you're driving forward, you're going to create the tension that causes conflict. So you've got to have that drive to move forward and the willingness to solve the conflict that you create in the mix. I remember some years ago, I was in Dallas, Texas, and I was consulting with a church there, a great pastor, a church that had been planted for about 5 years, I think it was. And he had hired, the pastor had hired a worship leader who was a great guy, gifted, good guy, had hired a worship leader and did a great job for 5 years, worked hard, took the church with the pastor from 0 to several hundred people. But it became obvious after a few years went by and the church had a few hundred people that the good guy is a good guy, godly guy, smart guy, but the worship leader really wasn't able to keep up and was beginning to stall out some of the attractions, some of the traction in the worship services. And the pastor was good and kind and waited and was coaching, but the pastor needed to make a change. And if he didn't make a change with that worship pastor, it was very clear that the church would stall. And I'll never forget going to dinner with the pastor and his wife. And we sat down and we had one of those heart-to-hearts. And I looked at him, and his wife was concurring and saying, Dan's right, you need to listen. I said, we'll do this the right way, we'll do this with honor and dignity, but if you don't make a change with that leader that you love and who has been with you for all this time, the church is going to stall. You're going to flatline. And we all know there's no such thing as holding steady. You're either growing or going downward. That means eventually you're going to begin to decline. And he looked at me, and he looked at his wife, and he said, well, then I guess the church is just going to have to stall because I won't let him go. So he so didn't want to deal with the issue and deal with the conflict that he was willing to actually let the larger kingdom issue suffer, because he just wouldn't do what he needed to do. So driving toward the vision with a redemptive heart, how do we deal with tension? How do we deal with conflict? What I'd love to do is make this very, very live and real. As you know, you're well aware, 12 Stone is pursuing a vision for 5 new campuses that launches in January of 2015, not very long from now. It's a crazy big God-sized vision. Some people say it's just crazy, but I think it's a crazy God-sized vision. But I want you to note down 3 things about this, because I want to use some illustrations and put some things on the whiteboard that really begin to make this idea that we're talking about in leadership and conflict come alive, make it real, make it fresh, make it current. But jot these 3 things down for context. First is, this big 5 vision, 5 pioneer campuses all at one time, January 15th, this is not going to happen without change. You've got to jot that down. The vision won't happen without change. Second thing to jot down is change will bring conflict. It just will. So first, it won't happen without change. Second, change will bring conflict. And third, our ability as leaders to resolve conflict determines in large part whether or not we're going to see this vision fully realized. So you need to apply that in your own context, that the vision that you're pursuing, the dream that you've got in front of you, what the organization that you're in, this is really even in your own home. This is just leadership. It's not going to happen without change. Change will bring conflict, maybe a little, maybe a lot, but it will bring conflict. And your ability to resolve conflict determines in large part whether or not you achieve the vision that's before you. So let's go back to this and give context to what we're talking about. 5 new campuses. So let's talk for a couple minutes about multi-site ministry. 12 Stone started for many, many years with 1 campus, and then we launched the second one. So now we went to 2 campuses. 2 campuses, no big deal. Walk in the park. All the multi-site experts would tell you, going to 1 to 2 campuses, no big deal. When you go to your 3rd campus, it's like, this is getting complicated. Who makes decisions? I'm not sure this is working quite as easy as it was when we had 2. Kind of like going from 1 kid to 2 kids. Because now there's 3. Now there's 3 here, and this is getting tricky. By the time you get to the 4th campus, if you don't have some systems and some organization in place, the wheels are gonna come off the track period, it's going to happen. So going from 4 to 9 all at once, it's like, if we're not ready with systems, if we're not ready to go, this is going to be trouble in River City. It requires, so what's the big idea? This requires centralization, period. This requires centralization. Enter conflict. What I want to do is to put a couple things on the board to sort of illustrate this for you, so you can see what I'm talking about. And so let me put up on here this idea that I just mentioned of centralization. You'll have to bear with my spelling. Sometimes I can't write, think, talk, do the blackboard all at the same time, but I'll get close. So we're working on this idea of centralization. And by the way, if you're in a local church environment where centralization, multi-site work isn't the deal, that's not what it is. This all relates to even yours, but you would just translate that to the difference between silos. You all have heard about that in organizations, in secular work, or in a local church, versus being aligned and moving together. You can just easily translate all this we're going to talk about on centralizing your work to one place or one location, one organization, to silos and being aligned or not being aligned. But let's go back to our live illustration here and talk about centralization versus decentralization in a multi-site kind of work. So let me draw this line down here, and on one side I'm going to put a 10, and on the other side I'm going to put a 1. And so we're going to call this the line of centralization. 10 being like maximum centralization, 1 meaning not at all. So let's call this side Big Brother, okay? It's a 10. You are told what to do, you know, the campus pastors, the way we do ministry. I mean, there is no variation. Here's the notebook, here's what you say, you have 18 seconds to say it. You know, if we say jump 4 inches, you jump. I mean, it's just, this is the way it's done. And by the way, the majority of churches are down toward this side on the centralization. Let's go ahead and mark the middle here. On the side of 1, let's call that every man does what's right in his own eyes, okay? Let's just put this every man. Or if you don't like that, if that has a negative vibe to you, because I'm not trying to put a negative vibe to it, a lot of people like this, call it freedom on this side. But every man does what's right, every woman does what's right in her own eyes, Big Brother. So we're keeping this live and real at 12 Stone because of the entrepreneurial bent of our senior pastor, and actually neither one of us are much for rules and kind of come by that naturally. 12 Stone birthed its first 2 to 3 campuses kind of, if we were to be honest and tell you where we're kind of barely past the 2 into the 3 zone in terms of a lot of autonomy, a lot of you get to do what you want, a lot of you get to go out there and kind of make it work and do your own thing and be a leader, and that's cool. And so when we realized getting to our 4th campus, and now deep into preparations for 9 campuses, we realized this isn't going to work. And so we made a declaration. We call it 5.1. We got honest, we went public, we said we are going to centralize. And so we said we're going to cross the line, we're going to go on to the centralization thing. And so we call that 5.1. Why 5.1? Well, the notion is we want to be as close to the line as we possibly can to acknowledge our roots of this entrepreneurial grit kind of leading kind of leaders rather than just manager types. So we want to stay as close to this as we possibly can to stay true to who we are. And so we call this notion 5.1. Now, however, moving from here to here is not an easy thing. And so how in the world, first question is, how in the world did you guys survive at 4 campuses over here at 2 or 3 rather than where most churches are? Most churches are 7, 8, 9 in terms of centralization that are multi-site. Let me tell you how we, I think, have done a really good job so far, but recognizing it's not going to get us to the distance. And the 2 things are really good or great relationships and maturity. God has blessed us with tremendous relationships on staff, highly relational, great maturity on staff. And that's what's helped us get here. what breaks it down, when I said earlier, by the time you get to 4 campuses, this is any church anywhere. By the time you're at 4 campuses, what begins to break it down is 2 other things: speed and pressure. Speed and pressure will crash good relationships and maturity always. Always, always, always. Speed and pressure will crash good relationships and maturity. And the more speed and the more pressure, meaning the more campuses, the more you're going to push this and things will crack and things. And now, so what bridges the gap between when you had the good relationships, smaller, 1 campus, 2 campus, 3 campus, and speed and pressure? It's systems. Systems bridge the gap. Systems is 5.1. Systems is centralization. Now, when you think about entrepreneurial, visionary, leader-type leaders, how many of you think are going to like that? Not so many. But for the good of where we're going to realize the vision, we've been working for a long, long time now on this notion of what does 5.1 look like? But so let's give a really practical one, and I'm not going to give one necessarily just from 12 Stone. I'm involved in a roundtable of exec pastors of really, really large churches, over 20,000, over 30,000, one church over 50,000. And this is a really common example, but I want you also to know that I could give you 25 examples. I just want to get you into the nitty-gritty of this idea of conflict and the willingness to actually make it happen or back off and not see the vision take place. So here, let's take a worship leader, and any one of 1 or 5 or 6 or 17 campuses. Here, a worship leader could pick any song he or she wants to lead, anytime they want to lead, whenever they want to lead it. Over here, the worship leaders generally are guided or told, or here's the worship set that you have to work from. Instantly, if you have any knowledge of church, instant conflict from men and women across the country who were used to picking any song they want, whenever they want, led by the Holy Spirit, to now there's a team and there's a group and there's a process and there's a system and we all do the same songs pretty much. That brings conflict to the mix. And so when we look at this idea, we have to, and we're saying that's what's required to get us where we're going. A lot of leaders will say, it's not worth it. I don't want to deal with all that. Some of them try it. They do things. They'll do whatever illustration it might be in whatever church it might be. And they'll do things and they blow up and staff leave and they can't get to the vision. But if they don't do this stuff, the church will stall out. This is complicated. So your ability to deal with conflict is big. One of the scriptures that I think really helps us zero in on the nitty-gritty real deal, and it helps us have, and we'll talk about this at the very end, the real honest last 10% conversation is James 4:2. And that is, you desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. James 4:2. Bottom line, it's just very simple. Bottom line, you don't get what you want. I mean, we've all been there. We've all had a leadership moment. We've all had a volunteer moment. We've all been in our families. We've all been in the neighborhood. And you don't get what you want. And so there's conflict. You, as according to Scripture, you quarrel and you fight. How you handle that, what you do with that, makes all the difference in the world. How you go work with your worship pastor or your spiritual formation pastor or the volunteers, or whenever you hit the conflict that comes from driving the vision forward, how you do that as a leader makes a huge difference. Let me give you 3 of the most common responses to conflict. Jot these down. First, the overbearing leader who becomes the bully. The overbearing leader who becomes the bully. That's his or her way of solving the problem. In other words, they overcome the conflict by crushing it. Honestly, it's an aggressive way of not facing the conflict, really, but they just you will do the songs I tell you, or you will do the small groups the way I tell you to do them, or whatever it might be. You crush the conflict by just shutting things down. Sometimes the bully will use a God card. They'll go spiritual on you. Well, God said. Well, really, he didn't tell anybody else, but I call it the God card. Or sometimes it's just a strong personality. It's not a God card, and they didn't really go into, aggressively crush somebody, but their personality is so big, they just get what they want. Not a good way to handle conflict. The second most common response to conflict, obviously not a good one, is the accommodating leader, almost the opposite. The first one is the overbearing. The second one is the accommodating leader, who becomes the puppet. This leader becomes the puppet. Doesn't face conflict by avoiding it. This is the servant shepherd who hides behind that. In other words, accommodating, kind, reconciliation, the loving shepherd, that's all good, but they kind of lift that up so high that they almost hide behind that and actually don't solve conflict because they won't lead in the midst of that notion of, well, I'm the loving, shepherding, reconciling leader. Third one is the fearful leader, who becomes the politician. So the overbearing leader that becomes the bully, the accommodating leader that becomes the puppet, the fearful leader who becomes the politician. This man or woman doesn't face conflict by pleasing all the different interest groups, which obviously, being the smart cohort that you are, that's impossible. This is a no-win death trap. You can't win. You can't make everybody happy. You might get a vote, but the strong ones, the strong leaders, the smart leaders, the fast leaders in the church, in your organization, will rise up and take over, they'll push back, or they'll just leave. Because they want their leader to solve problems, not make political promises and blah, 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 and never get anything done. So I did those kind of fast because that's not the goal. Those three are just paint pictures, and candidly, most of us slide into one of those three more often than we want to admit. So it'd be good in your quiet time thinking about your leadership to say, which one of those three might you, on occasion, have a tendency to slip into? But let's focus more on the one that we all want to be, the desired response, which is the courageous leader. The courageous leader who will face the conflict head on with grace and love. So let me just talk to you about four things here, and these four things will unpack and give some substance and some depth to what I mean by and what is required to really be this courageous leader who is adept and able to face conflict, to not be over the top, not go over the top on it, not kind of hide and not want to deal with it, but they'll strengthen your ability to deal with conflict. Well, here's the first one. Willing to declare the values. The courageous leader is always willing to declare the values. I think too many leaders don't like to do this because you get criticized for those values. We do. The moment you declare anything, you get criticized for them. And the second complication is the moment you declare your values, now you have to stick to them. Now you have to live with them. You went public, you declared your values, now you have to live with them, now you have to stick to them. But by knowing and believing the values, that's the thing that keeps you out of trouble as a leader. Because now you've trained yourself in how to think, how to behave, and how to lead. You got to get that. By knowing values and declaring them, you've trained yourself how to think, how to behave, and how to lead consistently. I remember it seems like yesterday, although it was a couple of Christmases or so ago now, it was 2011, and at 12 Stone, well, it was 2011 everywhere actually, but I'm thinking about 12 Stone, and if you remember back, I'll refresh your memory, Christmas that year in 2011 was on Sunday. Great. Now what are we going to do? Christmas was on Sunday. So we prayed and stewed and thought and had a great conversation. We decided we would have no Christmas services on Christmas Day, Sunday morning. And if you think that was an easy decision, you need to go back to the very first line of this talk. But let me tell you what we did do. We had 12 Christmas Eve services, each one with a salvation message and an invitation to say yes to the claims of Jesus Christ, the gospel message. Well, even though we had 12 Christmas Eve services and we had a gospel message and many, many people came to Christ, I don't know if I'm proud of this or I got an email from Satan. I mean, this is like the weirdest thing I get all kinds of difficult emails. This one's kind of creepy, and I kept it. I'm going to read it to you. But just to talk about conflict coming from all kinds of weird places, I kept it here on my email. I don't know if you'll think this is creepy or if you think it's kind of funny or what you'll think, but as a church leader, you just need to know some of these really weird things. So this came from, every time I see it, it kind of cracks me up, even though it's creepy. This comes from the Dark Lord, and by the way, obviously this isn't a real person, or the real person, actually it's not Satan. This is a person that won't let us email back. But the email says satan@hell.com, okay? And here's the message that was sent to 12 Stone, and I get a lot of these fun ones. Thanks so much for canceling church services on Sunday, 12/25. You're helping me win the war to make Christmas just another day. Why let that Jesus guy get in the way of presents and Santa? Great decision. Now if I can get the Baptists and the Catholics on board, I'll be set. In your debt, Lucifer. I thought, that's awesome. Somebody is so mad. Somebody is so ticked by their decision. They're completely lacking any courage or any integrity, but they're so mad at us that they wrote this email. And of course, we did get some other people who were not like that, but they were not happy about the decision. But here's how we stood true. Here's why we stood true. Here's why we could hug people, smile, and without angst tell them why we did what we did, because we made the decision based on values. We made the decision based on 3 values. One is family. We wanted the 12 Stone family to have that family time together. We made the decision, secondly, on the value of taking care of our volunteers. We knew it would require several thousand volunteers to make all those services happen. And we would step on the first value of family, trying to push things and make things happen where we could have 12 Christmas Eve services and accomplish church and accomplish the gospel. And third, we made the decision based on evangelism, where we could extend the invitation to Christ. What I'm trying to illustrate here is to just let you know that when you'll find your strength, because you lead well, you think well, you do things in the right way by declaring values. But when you declare them, you're able to answer with ease and lead with confidence, because it helps you know why you do what you do. Well, the second one is that you are willing to carry the pressure. You're willing to carry the pressure. The first one, you are, as a leader, willing to declare the values. Secondly, you're willing to carry the pressure. Teach your staff and leaders not to pass pressure up, but to embrace it, to absorb it, to carry it, to handle it. And this starts with you. It's a big deal. You've got to hear this. Absorb the pressure, carry the pressure, carry the pressure, absorb the pressure. You've got to be willing to do that as a leader. The truth in all of us, to some degree, some more than others, is that we want to relieve pressure. The natural human mechanism within all normal people is to get rid of pressure. And leaders do that typically in one of 2 ways. One way is either by simply telling somebody. Sometimes we just sort of relieve pressure. If we can just tell somebody or gain an ally, we sort of tuck our pressure away. That's not a bad thing, but don't give it away by saying it to somebody and walking away thinking, well, I put it over here by telling Joe. The second is actually handing it off or pushing it up. Now, sometimes you've got to push it up. You need some help. I get that. But what I'm saying is, as much as you possibly can, handle and absorb the pressure yourself. That's what leaders do. At 12 Stone Church, we have some of the most awesome ushers I've met anywhere in the country. We have an incredible usher team. And they do a great job. I love them. I used to get to lead the ushers, and I had so much fun doing that, but had to pass it off to another guy on the team. And one of the things, though, that our awesome ushers need to do that they don't like doing is addressing a mom or a dad who has a baby in the auditorium who starts crying, and they have to ask them to take the baby out. None of them like doing it at all. Actually, we have a worship service design that we don't even have. We actually don't invite infants to come in. But you know, we're sensitive. Maybe that's a first-time parent or first-time mom, and we and the ushers go, yikes, you know. And the general rule of thumb is, boy, if they insist, we're not going to stop them if they insist. But the ushers are trained and instructed. If a baby starts crying, you need to go to mom and dad and say, hey, we have an awesome nursery, can we help you? I'm just here to tell you, as great as our ushers are, they don't like doing that, and they are so tempted to pass the pressure or say something or just send it up or just not do it or go down the other aisle and just not be near it. Like, oh, I didn't see that. Did you hear it? I didn't. You know, that's a natural thing. But what I'm sharing with you is, wanting you to grasp is that a leader will go ahead, face the pressure, own the pressure, embrace the pressure, and deal with the pressure. Third, number 3, embrace the fact that seeking peace and harmony often produce the opposite effect. Embrace the fact that seeking peace and harmony often produce the opposite effect. One of my favorite books by Patrick Lencioni, I'm going to give you a couple quotes here in this section. This one comes from his book, The 5 Temptations of a CEO. And here's what Lencioni wrote about this idea of seeking peace and harmony often produce the opposite effect. Here's what he wrote. He said, it is natural for human beings to want harmony, but harmony is like cancer to good decision making. Wow, that's a huge statement. Compromise slows things down, and like consensus guarantees a watered down, like less than ideal or less than best solution. I think there's a couple of kinds of meetings. I've been leading meetings for a long, long, long time. And if I had to put them in two sort of generalized, two big baskets or two separate sort of big idea baskets, one would be the nice democratic meeting, the nice democratic voting. Everybody, nice, nice, nice. Let's just kind of not ruffle the water. Let's not make any waves. Let's just kind of go with the crowd and have a nice meeting, okay? And thousands of those happen in church boardrooms. And then there's the messy, high-energy debate, where you may get to a point where you're wondering if your brother or your sister next to you is saved or not. You're just wondering exactly what is going on. It's high energy, high debate, high passion. Of course, you can measure the health by afterwards. When you leave the room, you can go out and have a cup of coffee together. It's all good. But the health and the trust that's in the healthy meeting that has high trust is willing to have the messy, high energy debate. And after the meeting, everything's okay. Obviously, there's likely to be, in those kinds of meetings, strong opinions at your church, strong opinions at 12 Stone by strong leaders of all kinds of things. I mean, let's just tell it the way it is. I mean, there may be a high energy, messy meeting about the volume of your worship service. Don't tell me that doesn't happen. I mean, you know, you get it, and people get into all kinds of passionate debate. It might be a passionate debate about how your budget gets distributed. What team gets how much money, or what building gets built, or what gets fixed, or what. I mean, these things produce conflict. They produce, if you're going to go forward, they make things live and real. Or who gets what staff. We crack, I don't know if I should say this, we crack up at the heat that we'll get at 12 Stone just on the PC versus Mac debate. I mean, you want to throw a grenade in a room at our church. I mean, it's amazing what really great, good, but godly people can get pretty wound up about when it comes to conflict. But here's the point. Tolerate discord, whether it's a PC or a Mac or the volume of your worship service or where the budget goes or who gets what staff or how the big decisions are made. Tolerate discord. in the moment. Tolerate discord in the moment if it leads to long-term alignment and mission achievement. And that's very doable if you have healthy, high-trust relationships. And I mentioned a moment ago how you know if you do. If you have healthy, high-trust relationships, what I call benefit of the doubt relationships, when you walk out of that room where the amperage got a little heated up, the moment you're out, everything's good. You can get a cup of coffee, you can go have pizza, it's okay. The opposite, and this is what's really tricky, the opposite, you go back to this other side, that everybody's nice, everybody's okay, no one tells the truth, no one tells what they really want, no one tells what they really think meeting. That's the one, the unhealth, low trust. They go out and in the hallways and at the water cooler, you really hear what's really going on, and those churches, those organizations stall out because the conflicts never resolve because no one told the truth. Let me give another statement that Lenciani made from that same book, The Five Temptations of a CEO. He said, in fact, if no one gets a little pushed out of shape during a meeting, I feel like we probably didn't put all our issues on the table. I think he's right. Now, I'm not saying pick a fight. I'm not saying go in there and be a bully. I'm saying just be honest and trust the relationships. Okay, number 4 and 5 I want to say together and then unpack them a little bit as we wrap up. Number 4 is your willingness to make the hard decision, and number 5 is your willingness to have the tough conversation. These are a package deal. You can sort of get the idea just by hearing me say them, but let me go back and spend a couple minutes with each as we wrap up. The first one is that you are willing to make the hard decision. Once again, when you are combining that unique tension that leaders actually create because you're driving the vision forward at the same time bringing reconciliation in the midst of the conflict because you're moving the ball down the field. You get the notion by now. We've been talking about it for over a half an hour here. You've got to be willing to make the hard decision because the hard decision is what solves problems. The hard decision is to make the declaration. We're going to do A or B, right or left, yes or no. Somebody's got to make the call. Hopefully not a dictator just coming in, remember the bully, and just bullying the call, but by leadership, by conversation, by input, somebody is making the call that actually causes things to move forward. So a willingness to make a hard decision, meaning not everybody in the moment's going to be happy, but it's for the good of the organization. The church is going to go forward because you made the tough call. That requires, you can see how these things blend and blur and are connected. That requires your willingness to have the tough conversation, to tell the truth, to call out the elephant in the room. Most churches get stuck here because the leader or leaders or volunteer leaders aren't willing to do this. Honestly, you take leadership into your home, husbands and wives, it's the same thing. When you're not willing to have the tough conversation, you can't get out of the stuck place that you're in, and then the relationship begins to deteriorate. And in the name of reconciliation, in the name of peace, you actually go backwards because you don't solve the problem that's obvious in the room. Anyway, so at 12 Stone, PK, Pastor Kevin, has called this from, I don't know, before I came on the team in 2001. He called it the last 10%. Oftentimes, it's that last 10%, it's that last few moments, it's that last, let's just get it on the table where really the good stuff happens, the progress happens, the true reconciliation happens, the healthy part happens, the truth gets said, and you're able to actually go forward. Even if you disagree, you're able to go forward. So, what's that look like? I don't know for you personally in your leadership role, a senior pastor, a key volunteer leader, it's different for everyone. When I say what does that look like, I mean timing and rhythm. And certainly I can't put a formula on it. I don't know, you might have, but I'll say this because out of experience, if you're leading full time in a church situation, you're probably having a tough conversation every week. You're probably having at least one a week. Now again, I don't know in your context. I can't put a formula on it for you, but I want to get you at least in the ballpark. We're not talking every day, and we're not talking once a year, but you're having a tough conversation with somebody if the organization is going to go forward. Maybe I don't know, maybe one a week, and then maybe a hard decision every month. Again, there's no formula. I don't know. For a senior pastor in a really, really, really big church, there might only be 2 or 3 really, or 4 or 5 really tough calls a year. Well, that's not very many. Yeah, but in a really large church, they're really tough calls. And so sometimes the number might decrease, but the weight increases. You might be having to make more difficult decisions in a smaller environment because you're moving faster, but just the idea I'm trying to get out is for you to reflect as a leader. Are you having the tough conversations as needed? And are you making the hard decisions as they're needed? And are you measuring the health of the team by how high is the trust in the room? And how reconciled, how redeemed are the relationships? Because the more conflict you can have in the room with peace outside the room, the better you are. The more peace in the room with conflict outside the room, you've got some work to do. Anyhow, I hope these thoughts are help to you and discussion in the class, discussion in the course. As you, as a leader, face and deal with conflict, I pray God's wisdom, His timing, His blessing, and His favor on you as you lead through these waters in your church. Bless you. Thanks.